Hello everyone, I'm day weather meteorologist Don Day with your Public Lands Council weekly weather update for this July 30th, 2022. It's being brought to you by WSR Insurance Services Incorporated. Also being brought to you by Ag Risk Advisors. Well, this week's update is kind of a reversal of last week. Last week we talked about very hot weather going into the Pacific Northwest and central and northern California, parts of the northern Great Basin and Idaho. Now we're going to talk about that heat going back into the central and western parts of the United States, while the Pacific Northwest gets some relief from the heat. We are going to see the heat returning to the high plains, the Rockies, and the central U.S. next week. Now that part of the nation has enjoyed a break from the heat and in some areas, some rain. But we're going to see that heat come out of the Pacific Northwest and the far west. So the Pacific Northwest and far west will cool off a bit while the heat moves east. We're going to continue to see the monsoon. Monsoon rains have been heavy. We had some flash flooding in parts of Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, far southern Wyoming, parts of Utah this past week. The monsoon, which it normally is this time of year, is quite thick and deep. The trick is getting it to go further north to reach some of the central and northern parts of Wyoming, south central Wyoming, parts of Idaho and Montana, and parts of Nebraska that are kind of missing the monsoon rains here over the last couple of weeks. Now, there is some chance that towards the middle to the end of next week, some of that deeper monsoon moisture can get further north, and let's certainly hope so. The latest drought monitor does not necessarily reflect what has happened this week. This is precipitation as of this past Tuesday. But since that past Tuesday, we have seen some significant rains right here in many areas of eastern Colorado and this weekend into northeastern areas of New Mexico. So some of these red areas and brown areas are receiving some rain and getting some help. But this expansion here in the northwest corn belt of dryness is going to be a continued going concern. Now, in parts of southern Kansas and southern Missouri, while they have certainly been in very droughty conditions, they have had too much of a good thing. You may have heard about the flooding in parts of Missouri and Kentucky, 6 to 12 inches of rain in the last week in some areas, and they're going to be susceptible to more rain. We also have seen some heavier rains right here, and I'll tell you that the deserts of California, even the Sierra Nevada and Arizona, getting more rain over the next 7 to 10 days. The latest drought change over the last week shows that green. See those green patches? Even into Big Bend country of Texas, into eastern Colorado. There's some islands of green here where there's been help. But the dryness persists here, although they have gotten rain and they're going to get more. So next week's update is going to actually show some green in that area there. In the last week, this is through this past Thursday, you can see the rains in Arizona, the Four Corners region, look at eastern Colorado, southeastern Wyoming, getting some really good rain. Kansas, parts of south central Nebraska. Then you can see some of these heavier rains that went across the southern Corn Belt, Missouri, and parts of Kansas. We do expect that this area is going to likely have more chances of rain in the coming days, while we continue to have this dry pocket, and we continue to have it across central Texas along with the heat. This is the precipitation anomaly over the last week, and you can see that strip of green going west to east across the country where the concentration of that subtropical moisture coming up out of Mexico has been. Now, as we look at what's going to happen during the early part of this forecast period, this is for today, the making of this video, high pressure over the Great Basin and the Pacific Northwest. But you see this low here? This is going to come in and help cool off the Pacific Northwest a bit. The green arrow representing the flow of monsoonal air coming on in. So you can see we're going to have some showers and some thunderstorms, but the hot weather, at least here for the weekend, is going to be centered in this part of the nation here. But look what happens. This is this Saturday. This is next Saturday. See the big shift eastward? The high goes into the Midwest and Corn Belt. This will open the door to more monsoonal moisture, as represented by the green arrow here, into the Rockies, Great Basin, and High Plains. And see the Pacific Northwest with this low. The Pacific Northwest is going to be able to see some cooler weather moving on in, giving us a break from the heat, with the heat going more towards the Corn Belt and the Great Lakes a week from now. So it's going to be likely transient heat coming, but for the Rockies and the High Plains, do expect this weekend through next week to be pretty darn warm. But There could be more in the way of shower and thunderstorm activity, and we're hoping it gets further north up into these areas here, maybe Montana, western South Dakota, other areas of Nebraska, as well as back here further northward into the western slope of Colorado, Utah, and the Great Basin. And you can see that over the next week, there's an axis of deeper moisture bottled up right here. So long and south of Interstate 70 in the Midwest, then north and south of I-70 and I-15 in Utah and Colorado, and down south into New Mexico and Arizona, there is going to be more monsoonal rains. This area right here is an area that I do think has a better chance of rain this next week than what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which would certainly be good news because the monsoon moisture is having a really hard time getting north of Interstate 80. And that's going to continue to be the case for another week, but at least in the Rockies, it may be able to go further to the north. Over the next 7 days, it gets pretty warm again with the center of heat over Nebraska, South Dakota, then down into north central Texas and as well as Oklahoma. Yes, it shows it being warm here, but this is mainly early in the period, as temperatures will cool in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California next week, and this coolness you see in Mexico and into the Great Basin states due to that deeper monsoonal moisture pattern moving on in. But you can see the central and north central areas of the United States, after a break this past week in the heat, we're going to have to expect the heat to return once again. Our next update will be next Saturday, the first Saturday of August, believe it or not. Have a good week.